IVM.
Hello and welcome to yet another episode of Uncle Please Sit Lockdown Edition. I'm Joel Pereira, and with me remotely, as he has been for a while now, is
Tushar,
Tushar. Say hello, Tushar.
Hello, Tushar.
Also with us today, we have another special guest, Siddharth Singh, who's a researcher of energy and climate policies and the author of The Great Smog of India. Hi, Siddharth. Thank you for joining us. How's the lockdown going for you, yeah?
Hi Joel, hi Tushar. It's been great. Yeah, firstly, I must say, what a fantastic name for the podcast. I have not watched a single episode of the Game of Thrones, but it's very familiar. So the moment when you approached me, I was like, yes, I was sold. I just had to do this. So thank you for having me.
It's awesome to have you, man.
Yeah. The lockdown itself has been, I should be fortunate that I have, work right now. And in fact, I'm a little overworked, but I think that's a good thing. Things are not going too well for people. I think perhaps our models of development itself have had a role to play. Why things are not as well right now.
Wow, sweet segue into the topic we are going to be discussing today, Siddharth. Thank you for this. Otherwise, it would have been all awkward. So yeah, as Siddharth just informed everyone, what we are talking about today is development and Uncle's opinions of them and why they are all nonsense. And we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Hey everybody, welcome to another awesome week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you're not following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Paytm Money and Intel. We appreciate their support. It's been a really fun week, guys. We've had some great episodes on your old favorites. Cyrus Says, Advertising is Dead, Edges and Sledges, Football Shitball had a really fun episode as well. Definitely do check it out. I'm sure you're going to enjoy yourselves. And with that, let's continue with your show.
Okay, and we are back. With us is Siddharth Singh, a policy researcher and the author of The Great Smog of India. Siddharth, so like we were saying before we took off on a break, today we want to talk about development and what people think of development, because at least the understanding of what people have of development is building things, right? It's like either a new set of highways or a new flyover or an impressive like shiny skyscrapers or things like that. And that's what people believe development is. That's not true, is it?
No, of course not. I mean, development is something that is, I think, a far more expansive term. I think the reason why people are, obsessed with this idea of development, in the form of bridges and flyovers and so on, is I think firstly that physical infrastructure is very visible. I think it's harder to sell traffic management to somebody. It's harder to sell, the finer aspects of management, of development, of governance, because it's not really visible. And plus, our politicians love a good ribbon cutting ceremony. So all these things kind of play into what we think of development and what is provided to us, from the side of the government. And I think we have kind of got used to it. Just day before yesterday, I was having a Twitter conversation where, so I'm into sailing. And I thought that, a country as big as India has only one marina, one place where sailboats can properly park, and there are some restaurants, and, it's a kind of nice coastal community for people who like to be in the sea. The whole of India has only one of these.
And where's that? I wasn't aware.
This is in Kerala.
Okay.
Yeah, there's none in Mumbai. There's none in any other city, despite, people having boats, and despite there being international tourists who are interested to be sailing there. Now, I basically tweeted that, maybe a country as big as India should have at least a few dozen. To which Bahar Dutt, who's an environmentalist, she commented that please don't ask for such coastal infrastructure. They will just start paving beaches. And what? She's right. Because our idea of development or idea of infrastructure creation is that we need to pour concrete over something. If there's no concrete poured over it, we cannot call it. And she's perfectly right. Like even this demand will be met by such, policy responses from the government. I think we need to get away from that idea and try to understand what development is beyond that. I used to live in Mumbai long ago. I think this is about 10, 15 years ago. There was a government, and I'm forgetting which one, they basically, one of the big achievements that they had is that they created about 50 to 60 flyovers in the
Yeah,
capital.
that was the BJP Shiv Sena government,
Right.
95 to 99. Yeah,
I think it was that one, and that was a very
yeah,
big.
yeah,
It was
yeah.
a talk of the town back then.
Correct. Yes.
And I it got me thinking. Cities like New York, London, they don't have flyovers. Their idea of
Hmm.
traffic management is not building more flyovers. In fact, flyovers are very disruptive. They're anti-people in the sense
Hmm.
that you cannot walk. The streets then become owned by the cars as opposed to
Hmm.
people, as opposed to cyclists, as opposed to public transport users. A city like London has the same number of cars as a city like Mumbai,
Hmm.
and yet you'd be hard pressed to find flyovers in London the same way.
In London. Why do you think we've come to this though? Yeah, I mean, like, we all know our past. We are a colonial country, and we started off with very little infrastructure, and obviously we needed it at that time. And there was the Nehruvian idea of what was he calling it? The new temples,
The
which
temples of
were
modern India. Yeah.
temples of modern India, which was dams and factories and so on and so forth. Uh, does that still hold true right now? I mean, does that model still work?
See, I mean, there's no denying that India still needs to develop infrastructure. But I
Hmm.
think the way we've been doing it has obviously been wrong, and that's why I guess we are having this discussion in the first place. But
Hmm.
before I
Hmm.
kind
Hmm.
of get into that, I think it will be a good idea to take a step back and to ask what
Okay.
is development in the first place. So,
Okay.
can I ask you, in fact, Joel or Tushar, what you think development is? Like, I just want to understand, the general perception, like you said, you've been emphasizing on is building things.
Hmm.
But what does
Hmm.
development mean conceptually to you?
On a fundamental level, if I had to live in an ideal world, it would be good transport infrastructure, good health infrastructure, good education infrastructure, and generally something that adds to my quality of life and people's quality of life, not just mine, because we have a lot of situations where individual quality of life things which cause a problem for other people. But overall, anything that sort of enables higher quality of life in terms of your access to healthcare, education, your workplace,
Yeah.
your business, stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, my take also would be very similar. Actually, I mean, I would see development as something that is done make to allow people to be the best that they can be in whatever way possible. So yeah, so this covering the same stuff, right? Education, healthcare, obviously transportation, the economy is very important because prosperity matters. And yeah, that would. I mean, I'm aware it's a very abstract. What I'm saying is very abstract, but yeah, I think that is my idea of development.
I think, guys, both of you deserve a Nobel immediately because what you've said. I think is very profound, and it's something that I think is echoed by some of the biggest thinkers of economics through history. So,
Okay.
in fact, I wanted to drive you towards a definition given by Amartya Sen
Hmm.
on what development is in the first place. So,
Hmm.
the conversation, obviously, a lot of people would say like development is about increasing, per capita incomes or reducing poverty or, something specific, like you initially mentioned, like building roads or highways or education or health. But
Hmm.
what you later on, kind of refer to about quality of life, about being your best self. That is
Hmm.
where this eventually comes down to. So the definition given by Amartya Sen, which is very simple and expansive at the same time, is very simple. Is that development is freedom. Full stop. So in fact, he
Hmm.
has a book by that name, which is I think excellent and highly recommended. Everyone should read it. So
Hmm.
the idea basically is that development is the process of expanding human freedoms, right? So
Okay.
now you try to imagine what this means to a range of people. Let's start with, for example, a woman who's living in a very small village in the middle of a forest, for example. What does freedom mean for a person like her? Like she may need, for example, a source of livelihood so that she can, perhaps, buy food or be able to travel to the next town, for example. She may need access to clean water. She may need to get a good job. She may need certain skills.
Hmm.
All these things fall under the category of things that enhance freedom. And as a when you try to when you try to provide development to the people, you should try to basically evaluate whether this has made people more free. This definition is very expansive in the sense that it covers all forms of economic activities, as well as governance and how we kind of live together as a society. So for example, freedom is development. This concept includes GDP growth, because the idea is that GDP growth is a metric, and you can kind of understand what the overall wealth in any society is, like just the monetary wealth. Similarly, it includes flyovers also, because in certain cases, when properly designed, when you don't go overboard with them, flyovers can also provide some form of transportation solutions. It also includes primary health, primary education, obviously, because they make people capable enough to participate in the economy. Okay. It includes investment into science and technology, because science and technology can help human beings do better things. It includes, most importantly, things like justice and an election commission, which can provide a society which you consider free, because you're able to speak out, because you're able to get justice when your freedom to speech is curbed in any way. So this kind of I think broad approach is what India lacks at the moment. We have taken only very small aspects of it, and we kind of focus on those things.
But so this is obviously not something that people have been people have known this for a while, right? That this concept of development is multifaceted, etc. How did we come to this point where human infrastructure is not given as much importance as physical infrastructure? I think this Tushar, I don't know if you've been correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think our obsession with infrastructure started after the Chinese really exploded in the 90s, or was it even earlier than that?
I think it's also a combination of things. We're also overcompensating for those years of socialist rule that we had, where you didn't have a road, where you didn't have electricity, where you getting a phone took 10 years. So right now, after all of that, a part of you is also like, nahi yaar, I need all this, like this mall, this flyover, this building. It makes me feel like I'm in a country that's developing. So there is, I feel like there is a great deal of overcompensation when it comes to physical infrastructure, primarily because this country was deprived for about 43 years or 45 years, or at least it started opening up in around 91, 92. So there is that aspect, and which I feel like also has a massive psychological effect on our politics, on our general public discourse. And of course,
like Siddharth was saying,
China is a huge thing. China is a huge thing. Also.
Like Siddharth was saying earlier, it's very difficult to find a politician who won't want to be part of a ribbon cutting ceremony.
Yeah. Dude, our Prime Minister loves doing that. So,
loves it.
So, every level of politician loving doing that.
And these 5-year, election cycles help no one, because what usually happens is, things like making a flyover or calculating the GDP, you can do it very frequently, and you can kind of tout achievements. How do you tout a 0.5% improvement in the public education system, for example? Or how do you tout something like a mortality increase by 0.1 years? It's very hard to kind of.
Or look at it this way, like Siddharth, the book that you've written, why is in a city like Delhi, why is the air not an election issue?
Yeah.
It's insane, because that's literally killing you.
Absolutely. In fact, an anecdote about this, in the year 2001 or 2000, the Supreme Court basically said that all polluting industries which are in residential neighborhoods in Delhi will have to move out of the city. So it's one of the China kind of moves where you kind of just en masse get rid of industries from the city. Obviously, this was done to improve the equality of people living around it. What happened after that? People came out on the streets to protest against that. They wanted those industries there. People at the end of the day, they want their livelihoods, and I think for them, their rosy roti, their income generation mattered a lot more than clean air. And they said that yes, we are dying here, and we'll die anyways, even if we go outside. There were riots after that. I think 2-3 people even lost their lives. One of the first, I think, occasions in Indian history where people died because they were protesting for the right to have bad air.
I remember Delhi, man. There was in the late 90s, early 2000s, I remember the situation in Delhi was really bad. Now, I don't know if if I'm getting the timing right, but I remember the situation was really bad. And then the Supreme Court said that all public transportation has to move to CNG. I think that happened around 2003 or 2004, if I'm not mistaken. And immediately the quality of air became better. And I remember reading about how people assumed that that would just be enough, and polluting vehicles, these like auto rickshaws or these taxis or whatever are all on CNG now, or the buses are on CNG now, so we're done. This is as good as it gets. But another thing that I wanted to ask you about was, how did we, like, you have this in a country like India, for instance, we have states in the south, okay, like for instance Tamil Nadu or Kerala, which have focused on human infrastructure, right? In the sense that their human indicators are much higher than what we have in the north. Why do you think that split happened? I mean, what is your take on that?
That's a very good question. I think it goes back into a lot of historical situations, both cultural as well as political. It's very hard for me to pin down what makes, for example, the Kerala style, where they focus more on this, different from something like Uttar Pradesh. I think in both these cases, like, in the case of Kerala, for example, I'm aware that there were certain rulers back in the day that put a lot of emphasis towards lower education, that is primary education. Similarly, in the case of Tamil Nadu, which is known to also have very good social indicators, there was a rise of certain type of politics which basically realized to win elections, it's important to have midday meal schemes, for example. So automatically this impacted both school enrollment as well as the nutrition of young children. So I won't say it was just a case of an accident of history. Like, clearly people were working towards it, but there was something cultural and political about it that kind of drove them towards this. Whereas in, I think, Uttar Pradesh, Haryana, or the so-called erstwhile Bimaru states of India, they had a lot more, I guess, social problems, and they were not able to really get out of this cycle of violence and cycle of discrimination against each other. I think there was something to do with that, but I won't say I'm the expert on this particular issue.
No, anyway, it doesn't. We're just talking about like the overall picture. So it's not, obviously getting into the social structure of North India is an entirely different kettle of fish.
But this would be a fascinating study. I hope someone's already done it or is doing it. Like this dichotomy within the states with regards to the way they approach development.
Yeah,
fascinating read.
True.
No, there are some of these like upar se ideas. No, like there's one school of thought that says basically that South India has always been relatively peaceful, because of its distance from invasion and warfare, etc., etc. So its society has evolved to a greater level. They have not become as hard as, say, the people in the Gangetic Plains or the people in the Northwest. I don't know how much that makes sense, but that is one prevailing theory because of the sheer distance from all the, like, even during colonial times. I think South India was by and large unaffected by things like the mutiny, the Glorious Revolution of 1857, and things like that. So I believe that's one of the reasons why it's just different. But
perhaps you should get a historian for the next podcast and explore this issue. I think this is very fascinating.
Yeah, no, we would actually at some point. We're hoping to get all of that done also. But also, I want to look back at this thing that you mentioned about, the fact that what's not visible is generally not marketable in terms of the human. Can we sort of, I don't know, I want to look more at that in terms of like something as simple as actually a midday meal is measurable, but like the pollution.
Not visible. I mean, a lot of things are measurable, but they're not necessarily visible.
Yeah, but they're measurable in the sense that, okay, you'll know because maybe a kid from your house is getting a meal.
Right.
So there is that. But like, how does one get to a point where this invisible sort of development, the one that actually also matters a great deal, how do you think we get to a point where it can be sort of inculcated within a political structure or a marketable structure to the people?
I think it's very important for people to. I think it's very important for politicians to be able to make this visible. So if there's something that's not visible, is there some data point? Is there some metric which makes the progress perceivable by the average person? As a simple thing, like economists and climate activists have been calling for a long time that we should reduce carbon emissions, and flights are a problem, and industries are a problem. But how about you did something as simple as mention the amount of carbon emissions that take place when you fly from Bombay to Delhi, for example? Something that helps you visualize the scale of the problem or what your contribution to it is. Or if any gains have been made, how can we perceive those gains? To talk about it in terms that people understand is very important. And I think these are things that eventually you can try as hard as you want. Some of these things, will eventually come down to ribbon cutting and physical infrastructure. And as a very small example, do any of us know the person who invented the seat belt in a car? And whoever this person was, and whoever the political leaders were who mandated it for everyone to use, they have literally saved, in the tens of millions of lives in the past. Single-handedly, whoever that first person was, or the first politician. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Ralph Nader in US was the first to mandate it within America, and then since then it's become a thing. But point is, there are several things like this that make governance really work for the people. And then on the other hand, there are statues and which are good for photo ops.
About that seatbelt question, Siddharth, I used to be an auto journalist for a very long time. So I actually know the answer.
Oh, wow.
I had a moment where I was like, who's going to answer this?
Let's do this, Joel. Please educate me.
It was a guy. So here's actually, it's an interesting story. It had many iterations, but the 3-point seatbelt, the one we use, the one that connects to the B pillar of your car, the clasp at your hip and the clasp at the other side. That's called the 3-point seatbelt. That was invented by a guy named. Sorry.
Now you're just showing off all your details.
No. So here's the thing. It was created by Volvo. Okay, in the late 50s, I think it was 58 or 59, by a guy named Bolin, and when Volvo realized the benefit of the seatbelt, they just gave the patent away for free. Apparently, I'm sure that now Volvo is doing a lot of PR about it, but he said that it was just like Volvo is into safety, and we realized that this is revolutionary as far as safety is concerned. So they just gave the patent away to everyone, and car makers immediately started using them because they realized also that it's going to be something. Because just the previous year, if I'm not mistaken, Jonas Salk created the polio vaccine, which he also gave away for free. Which the patent, he made it public property, right? So anyone could create the polio vaccine. That was the spirit at that time, which we have lost massively right now.
Don't you think we should actually have statues of people like Bolin and Salk?
No, I completely agree.
I completely agree.
The larger point basically is that people don't know who they are. You'd know the story of the person who perhaps pulls you out after a disaster. The person who prevented it is unlikely to be known. And until we don't realize the impact of people and actions like these, I think we won't be able to understand how this invisible governance works.
That's true.
I think one of the contentious issues that at least here in India we've always had, and not just in India, actually globally, but a lot in India, is this idea of development versus displacement, right? Like even most recently at RA, when the the Regional Development Authority wanted to build the metro car shed at the RA, inside the RA forest, there were apparently, I think, 27 or 28 villages with the local indigenous people who are tribals, and everyone was very cavalier about moving them, and the talk at that time, I remember, was obviously it was the unmentioned tone, A lot of people on Twitter said it, a lot of people on social media said it, but even the way that the media covered it was, so what if, this metro is going to benefit tens of millions of people? Everyone knows that the population of Mumbai is like 20 million plus. So it's going to benefit millions of people. And if these people are moved out, what's the big deal? So why do you think that is? Why do you think that people have this idea?
I mean, in general, of course, people are discriminatory in this country. We have heard so many stories of, having different elevators for servants, and just the use of the word servants, the way we are so brazen about, how we talk about the poor. I think it's a very mentality thing. But I think this is a very good opportunity to get a little wonky just for a couple of minutes. I think to understand what we are discussing in the theoretical sense and how we can apply it to the case of RA and also elsewhere in wherever this happens. Right? So this is this form of economic development, which can impact people who are otherwise should not be impacted by it negatively. Is the idea that's at the heart of this is called externalities. I mean, you may have heard the word used in a very generic sense, but in economics, externalities occur when between the transaction of two people, a third person is affected. For example, if I wanted some steel and you were a steel manufacturer, so you produced that steel, but in the process of producing it, you also let out some pollution, which went into the stream, and the local fisher people are no longer able to fish because all the fish are dead. So an externality has occurred. That externality has occurred on those people, but it was a private transaction between you and me. So this idea of externalities, of it being a problem, and therefore the idea that we need to fix our externalities, is actually at the heart of what economic policy making is about. So in general, the government has a few roles. There are a few, I would say, things that a government is supposed to do. One very key aspect of governance is to prevent externalities and not to give rise to them. I mean, of course, there are many things where externalities would occur, just like in this case, you're making metros, and metros are very important, by the way, because I think in general, electric rail-based transport leads to about 1/10 of the pollution that going in a motorcycle or a car would. So, in general, yes, we should have more metros and so on. But how do you actually plan it out? Do you plan it out in a manner that leads to displacement of people? Do you plan it out in a manner that leads to the cutting down of forests? These are the questions that everyone grapples with, but something that the government should work to protect, as opposed to kind of take away from people and from. I think to me, what would a good land acquisition policy look like? I think a good land.
This is something. This is something that that keeps coming up, right? Because we've had so many of these situations in India before. Like for instance, with mining, either with the Vedanta in the Vedanta subsidiary. What was that? Sterling, right? In Tamil Nadu. And then the coal Sterlite, yeah. Then the coal mines in Jharkhand, or even things like the big one, like for instance the Sardar Sarovar project, right? Like for years and years and years, we had the Narmada Bachao Andolan. You had Medha Patkar going on fast after fast. You had all these people who were being displaced, and yet they didn't meet with much sympathy. Why do you think? What would you say to someone who argues for quote unquote the greater good?
See, the greater good is in the good of everyone, and it's a fallacy to think that the greater good can only come, when certain set of people have to pay a price for it. It is possible, and in fact, the only right way to make good policies, to develop infrastructure, to in fact even acquire land for different purposes that have benefits to the society, you have to make the people who are displaced from it a part of that solution. So if they don't have a share in the profits or the revenues or whatever else that comes out of it, if they don't have a share of being in the participatory process itself, like their voices being heard, if you don't have that, of course there will be protests. You cannot just uproot people, and that's what I was saying. to me, the best land acquisition policy is one that could successfully work in a place like Malabar Hill. If you cannot make a steel mill in the middle of Malabar Hill, then you cannot make it anywhere else. And the same policy should apply.
Exactly a great analogy.
That's I've never thought about it that way.
Yeah, brilliant analogy. That makes complete sense.
Yeah, no, I mean, think about it. Think about what would happen tomorrow if Malabar Hill, or like I live in Bandra, where I live in Bombay, if like tomorrow the government said, hey guys, we are going to create a steel mill or something of great importance, like maybe a water recycling plant or something like that.
Okay, forget that. I'll give you a simple example. Buildings in Bombay going to redevelopment. How long does the negotiation for that redevelopment take, considering every flat has a different demand? So, like the fact that if that's the level of scrutiny you want, right? That's the level of independence. Obviously, it can be a problem for a project where maybe 50,000 people are involved or whatever. There, you can figure out sort of mechanisms where you create something. I don't know. I guess Siddharth would be able to tell us better about that. But the thing is, we have an issue even with our own building development. So these people, if they had to deal with an infrastructure issue, they would lose their minds.
Yeah, but that's a great. That's actually every time someone asks me, every time I have this conversation with anyone else now, because we keep having this conversation, right, about like because the city like Bombay right now. I don't know if you visited, Siddharth, but it's like the entire city is one giant building site right now. With the metro being constructed and so many things happening simultaneously and all. So, one of the things that is happening in Bombay right now is this big coastal road project. Again, this is one more thing, right? That everyone is like, you have cases filed against the road in the Supreme Court, and, that proceeding is happening right now. And you have the fisher people who are going to be displaced. You have the environmental degradation, obviously, that's going to happen. But yet, the government seems to be charging forward with this, right? Question I wanted to ask you, and this is also concerning like what you were saying, your area of expertise, which is pollution, environmental or air pollution, is why does the government not listen to the science? Why do they not focus on it?
I think very interesting, because globally, I think a lot of scientists are realizing now that they spent too much time being very wonky and very, very scientific, and did not communicate their ideas enough. And now suddenly you have resistance in the form of politicians being, against climate change action, or, basically being against any form of any voices that could inform of longer term degradation to the air, water, all of those things. I think it's firstly the lesson out of this is that now is the time when all scientists should be able to communicate their ideas in the form of tweets, in the form of videos, in the form of podcasts. If you're not able to do that, you will not be able to convince people and politicians. In general, I think there are several reasons why politicians would not take scientists seriously. Of course, one is that science is too rational, and as a politician, you have to reach out to people in the emotional sense. You need people to connect to you. You need to tell stories. Sometimes science comes in the way of these stories. A good story is not necessarily one that is too rational and talks about, it has too many disclaimers, right? So I think that is one issue. And I think in general, there's a constituency that politicians also try to appeal to. Not everyone really cares for science. There is the ideas of certain very orthodox traditions and religions may come in the way, and they may be very cherished beliefs among the people. And as politicians, they are only going to exploit what works. They're not there to, they don't care for the public good as much as they care for, what people want. And let's try to execute what people want, because that helps them with the next election and so on. And of course, I think the final point would be that there are lobbies. There are lobbies that don't want you to care about science, because that could be against their profit, and therefore against the profit of a political party or the government.
Do you also think it's got a lot to do with how a lot of our sort of ideas of development or ideas of going forward have also been sort of acquired from America? We look at America a lot as opposed to looking at Europe and the rest of Asia, where America obviously is very big on roads, is not big on rail infrastructure and stuff like that. Do you think that has also played an important part?
Absolutely. I think that is spot on. The American society is a very road-based society. They either take the road, it's about the long drives on highways, or it's about taking a flight. There's no concept of taking the train. If you look at the railway map of the US and compare it to, say, Europe or China, you will see that the Amtrak rail is so short. In fact, it almost makes you feel like the map is incomplete. Whereas if you just looked at the railway map of Europe without any border, you'll be able to see the continent of Europe coming out from the railway lines itself, because it's so dense. Every village, every town is connected. I think in general that is where India, of course, from the time of the British rule, has had an extensive railway network, and it has increased, but not that much. But still, there is I think most districts are connected now. We need to double down on this. This is what the future is. The future is rail. The future is very connected, cheap, clean, because it's very hard to get electric cars rolled out, whereas it's very easy to have electric trains rolled out. This is where we should be investing in. I think Mumbai is missed. The only reason why we are making roads out in the sea is because you have so badly managed the traffic within the city. You can make. In fact, studies have shown from the United States, you can increase 4 lanes, and all those lanes will get filled up by cars. Then you can make 2 more, and those lanes will also be filled up by cars.
Yep.
In fact, cars are made available when roads become available. People buy cars depending on where the road is available to them. So you can make those coastal roads. It will not really solve the congestion problem at all. It just give it like 3 or 4 years. All those roads, you'll have a traffic jam, in the sea, perhaps with a better view instead of being in the city.
That is 100% true.
Yeah, there's a good example also. Like, for example, the coastal road is going to be connected via what's known as the Bandra-Worli Sea Link. I don't know if you had a chance to see it.
Yes.
So it's basically, when it was it took like forever to build, and I think massively went over cost, and I think was massively delayed also. But when the project was created, the projection was a lakh vehicles would use it, and X amount, I don't remember the exact amount of money that would be made. But ever since opened, it's never hit more than 35 or 30,000 cars a day. And again, it's not making the money, because of which then, of course, the toll rates have consistently gone up. And that's a classic example. And again, it's not played that massive a role in decongesting that area. It's basically just helps people from South Bombay get to Bandra faster.
Absolutely.
Siddharth, here's a question for you. Okay, considering you are a policy researcher, etc. Like, let's say I was a politician. Now, something like, again, I'm afraid that this conversation is going to go very Mumbai centric, because the two of us, Tushar and me, are both like born and raised.
I'm actually glad we are, because all my conversations so far are so Delhi centric that I'm glad we're having this.
No, but if you use this Mumbai coastal road as an example of these large projects that people have been talking about, like highways and so on and so forth, it's very apparent if you break it down, right, that the number, like, I'll be very honest, when the coastal road idea was mooted a while ago, I was for it. Okay, because I was, like I said, I used to be an auto journalist, and I feel guilty about it sometimes, because I'm sure I contributed towards, hey guys, cars are amazing, drive them all the time. And, and I used to commute by car, and I was for it, because I'm like, hey, nice, it will be good to, have more roads and get from one place to another easily. But then when you break it down, right, it doesn't benefit anyone except for a very small number of people, right? The people who own cars and the people who can afford to drive them every day. So my question is this, that if, say, I was a politician, and say, like, in the mood of the global political scene right now, if I was a populist politician, right, how would I sell this idea that, hey, this is shit, and if we went in this direction, it would benefit you, the poorer sections, or you, the people who don't have cars, or you, the people who are like struggling to travel in trains or whatever. How would you do that?
Also, one second. I'd also like to add an extra point to that, because we're in the middle of COVID. I'm seeing this with a lot of people who had actually sold their cars and started using Uber or public transport or whatever. But now
Mm-hmm.
with COVID, they're realizing, oh shit, I wish I had my own vehicle. And I
Mm.
know a lot of people in particular who are like, I'll get my bike again, I'll get my car again. So that I also want to add that aspect to what Joel said. So how do you do that
Yeah,
in that environment also?
Yeah,
I
I was
think
one of those people. Yeah, I drove an SUV for many, many years, which I sold off like like last year because I was just not using it, because of ride share and, so on and so forth. My transport situation, I realized was much better using public transport. But now I'm beginning to wonder, like, damn, did I move too soon?
no, but I think this is in general, this is a thing that everyone is grappling with. There are two theories that have come out, which and we are yet to see what will eventually happen. The first
Mm,
is that like you said, people will not trust public transport the same way, and therefore more people will buy bikes and cars and so on.
mm,
At the same time, there'll be a negative pull in the sense that a lot of meetings will perhaps take online. A lot of people perhaps won't travel, and perhaps these two things will nullify each other.
mm,
And the net impact of it will, in terms of say emissions, which can be quantified,
mm,
that may not be too much this way or that. So in other words, we
mm,
will still have to do what we were initially doing in terms of decarbonizing transport. Those greater ideas will probably still apply, and
mm,
so it's something that uh, in general we used to focus on. For example, rail based transport, we used to focus on electrified transport, and
mm,
now in the case of Europe and North America, they're also focusing on micro mobility. So people have their own little electric cycles or these scooties which have the potential to displace a lot of cars. But I think
mm,
eventually all of this comes down to what the most intrinsic motivations are of any government and how well you can play to that. I'll give you
mm,
this. The US and India are very different countries. The US has a lot of domestic oil. They are a net
mm,
domestic exporter of oil. For
mm, mm,
them, it makes no sense to stop the use of oil. The
mm.
way their government will earn money is if the companies are able to extract more oil and therefore pay more taxes on it, and therefore it's a car-based society for that reason. Through history, the oil industry, the automobile manufacturing industry, they all came together and then they made it extremely inexpensive. They sold it as something like, will give you freedom, and it was like the Marlboro man selling the cigarette. It was, the idea was that it gives you that ability to enjoy life in a way that trains won't. Whereas in a country like
Mm,
India, we don't have oil. We import about 85-90% of our oil, and this will continue to keep rising. We fair enough, we have our domestic manufacturing industry of vehicles now, but the point is, because of these constraints, it's easier to sell public transport, easier to sell decarbonization of the transport sector to politicians
mm,
if you frame it in that way. So you always need to
mm,
frame issues in a manner that would appeal to a politician in their most intrinsic and basic instincts. Like, they want to win that election 5 years from now, and so that is their number one priority. And
mm.
what can you do that would help them show an achievement, but at the same time actually helps the society? And therefore the framing of issues completely differ depending on the geography you're in.
Mm-hmm. No, like considering a city like, say, a city like Delhi, right? You had the metro, which has completely changed the landscape of the city, right? The metro, it's undeniable that the metro has changed the way that people in Delhi move, people in Delhi, and everyone always remembers it for, who created the metro system. And yet, I believe it was the Congress party who inaugurated it, and they lost.
But then again, that was factored in by a bunch of other things also. I think it was also because the whole anti-corruption campaign and a bunch of other things, and about 16 years of anti-incumbency.
I guess so, yeah. No, but I was asking Siddharth, how do you sell the idea of benefit of progress for all? How do you sell the idea of development for all? I mean, again, I'll keep coming back to this point because for, like, again, in the city of Bombay, by and large, if you save the money that you were going to spend on the coastal road, and you say you are going to develop mass other types of mass transit, like for instance bus services or putting another line on the metro system.
I wanna just pause you there. Sorry. This is actually a perfect example you gave because the BEST, which is the bus service in Bombay, and it's for the longest time it's actually considered one of the best bus services around, at least in the country, at least till the 90s maybe. They've been struggling for the last 5 to 10 years. They've been struggling because Uber, Ola came in, and lots of people have moved to private vehicles, and also there's been general mismanagement. So it reached to a point where the number of buses has massively gone down. So a lot of people, and so they started cutting back, but then a lot of people started protesting to the point where they were like, these are the lifelines of the city. They transport about 30-40 lakh people. They're important because a lot of people who use them, a lot of especially poor people who use them, can't access, they literally can't go to school anymore, like stuff like that. So the then BMC commissioner, BMC is sort of the municipal corporation which oversees the BEST. They said, the best has to pay for itself. In the sense, it has to justify its cost, and basically said, "Ke paisa do, because it's not making money, it's not valuable enough." On the flip side, they're putting hundreds of crores. They're building one of the biggest public infrastructure projects in the form of coastal road, which will be used by less than 5% of the transport, the public who uses transport. And it will cost per kilometer cost, even in the longer term, is going to be at least 30-40 times higher than a bus or a train. So this is actually what you pointed out is a great example, because you don't want to invest in buses which are actually indirectly paying for themselves. And also helping transport, reducing pollution, bunch of other things. But you have no qualms. You're never asking those questions about money when it comes to what infrastructure essentially the rich will use.
Yeah, I think every time we have these conversations, we circle back to the same classism of it all, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like, screw the garibs. we want everything to be nice and clean and neat. Not necessarily, what not nice and clean and neat, but you know what I mean. Like, we want things to be like how I saw when I went to Singapore on holiday.
Yeah.
Sorry, Siddharth, you were saying?
This, I think, classism itself also comes from certain economic and governance realities. We assume that people inherently become classist, and you're born classist, but that may not necessarily be true. So I see it a little differently. Like, you had asked this question for just a couple of minutes ago about how do you convince politicians about development for all, or how do you push towards something like that? But the answer to that is there is no such thing as development for all. There are always, without exception, there are always competing interests. And it's the job of a leader to be able to, gauge and act upon those competing interests that perhaps benefit the poorer more, or the people who are maybe more vulnerable, or the majority, depending on what the needs of the society are at that point of time.
Okay.
The needs of somebody who may have inherited wealth and therefore lives in South Bombay, has a car, a big house, are very different from the needs of somebody who lives in North Bombay, perhaps in shanties, and has to take the train every day to South Delhi. There are competing interests, and there is no solution that can help both of them. If you have to spend the same 1 rupee or the same 1 lakh rupees, there's nothing you can do that will satisfy both of them. So therefore, as a leader, it's your job to be able to gauge what is good for the society, what is good for congestion, pollution, so on. Unfortunately, the way it works in our country is politicians are not the poor. They may talk about being for the poor, but they're all very rich. The average income of a politician, the average member of parliament or an MLA, would be at least 10,000 times the per capita income of the country, maybe even more, maybe 1 lakh times, or 1 crore times that. So I think eventually they are the constituency that is deciding what needs to be done, and therefore they have already chosen a side with the nature of who they are and what politics is in this country. You cannot win an election if you're a poor person, and therefore the classism comes from that economic reality itself.
That makes sense, I guess. Because even though you have these ideas of like socialism and these at the end of the day, it is going to benefit the rich much more than it will benefit the poor. Plus, I guess the poor are also easier to silence on some level. Like we saw it, we keep seeing it happening. Like, especially not maybe like RA when the RA protest broke out. It was because it was in a metropolis like Bombay, and because there were social media and cell phones and video and this and that. We saw the violence that was visited upon the activists and the arrests and so on and so forth. But yeah, it's happening all the time. Yeah, in all these places and all these smaller towns and villages, where it's so much easier, I guess, to shut people down using violence, especially from the state. And it ties into that thing also, that basically now we've come to a point, I feel, where for some, like when the RA thing was happening, everyone who was protesting against it, we had a section of people calling them anti-national.
Yeah.
Like because the metro was, they perceived the metro as like a nation building exercise. But obviously that's not.
You can call anything a national exercise and get away with it, because anyone opposing it becomes anti-national automatically, regardless of what the issue is.
They also start pitting things like, for example, a lot of people are like, 6 people die in Mumbai trains every day. Yeah. Now you are going to be responsible for more deaths because this project is going to get delayed. I'm like, but that's not. It's like these are two very different issues.
Yeah. And again, it goes back to the same point. It's as though this depends on that. It doesn't. There are two different issues, and both can be dealt with on their own merits.
Yeah.
But like Siddharth was saying earlier about how science comes in the way of a good story. Like this 6 people die every day is a very emotional thing to tell someone, and then
it's
on the other hand you have
quantifiable number, as opposed to
But you can also frame science in a manner that can appeals to people. I think a lot of recent science journalists and science communicators have done an excellent job in being able to talk about the universe and the climate change from a very global perspective. Yeah. These are things, the conversations that were perhaps not happening to the same extent 100 years ago, but they are now. And I think there's reason to hope that this also becomes a constituency and people actually care for it in a more electoral kind of sense.
You're absolutely right, Siddharth, because even like in these past few days, I've been researching some stuff about this podcast, and every bit of information about development and about displacement and so on and so forth was just, I wouldn't say hidden, but so inaccessible because of, the way it was written and the way it was communicated and the way it was, even the numbers were just like these giant databases. It's not easy for people to understand, right? Why do you think people have not been able to communicate these ideas?
I mean, it's because they're just technical, but I kind of differ with you on this, because I think that this is actually the golden age of self-learning. This is the golden age of communicating science in a manner that it could never have been communicated before. If you go on YouTube, you just look up a lecture on one of these issues, say development or some quantum physics or something, you will find such fantastic videos available for free. Anyone in the world can access it with an internet connection and a phone in the hand. Just imagine, was this possible 50 years ago? I agree that there's, since you may have, reached upon a new topic and therefore there's a big black wall in front of you and you don't really know how to surpass that because you still know a few keywords to look up and so on. But just think about how much harder it was only 50 years ago. You'd have to go to the neighborhood library. You would have to have a neighborhood library in the first place. The library would have to be well stocked. You would need days. You won't really be able to look up every little thing. And I think that's what has changed. But we're only at I would say, generation 1 of this change. I can't wait to see what happens in the next 10 or 20 or 30 years. I think, in fact, your podcast is a very good example of this. The fact that we are talking about this, and my hope is that somebody will be listening on the other end who can take these conversations forward in their own homes. This was not possible 100 years ago or 50 years ago.
Yeah, that's true.
That's a
cool. I think
a positive note to end on. A slightly optimistic note after all our lack of optimism.
Yeah, it's difficult sometimes, man.
It's always difficult. I don't think it will ever get to a situation where there will be generations of people entirely optimistic. In fact, I think it's important that there are people who are skeptical, people who can actually remove the pink, the rose-eyed goggles rather, and be able to see what exists beyond that, so that we can actually do something about it.
Yeah. No, that's true. That's true. I think that's very important.
No, I've been following this in the US, right? This entire Black Lives Matter protests and things like that. And in 2 weeks, the way people in America having conversations about systematic racism and pulling down statues of Christopher Columbus because he was like a notorious colonizer and slave trader, etc., etc. And this is all in like literally what their society has developed for hundreds of years is being overturned in like a matter of weeks.
Dude,
and
NASCAR said that they will not allow Confederate flags anymore.
Are you serious? When did this happen?
Yesterday.
Yes, yesterday.
I'm like, wow.
NASCAR is like redneck central, no?
Exactly. And there was a pretty good speech given by the chairman of NASCAR or the head of NASCAR. Yeah. It's actually very progressive.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't see that.
I mean, that's when you know real change is happening.
So there's at least one thing about cars that I know more than Joel. That statement was made before you. Just one, nothing else.
No, we never, when I used to track it because that was part of my job, we never actually bothered with NASCAR because the joke is that, in NASCAR, you start your engine and you turn left and keep doing that. Because they're running around in a circle, in an oval. Na?
Only rednecks would like that.
Yeah.
Only rednecks. I've actually never witnessed a NASCAR race, but I had no interest to it. I've seen Formula One a couple of times, but NASCAR was just like too boring.
But I think we're deviating now. I think we should.
We should wrap. Wrap
Tushar? Up. Thank you, Siddharth. This was extremely informative for both of us, and we're hoping it's going to be extremely informative for our audience as well, all 9 of them. And we're hoping that you come back again with, and hopefully we'll do a proper introduction next time where we don't f it up.
I think if there's one thing that that if you could take away from this podcast is the next time you see one of these grand projects, you just ask yourself who's benefiting from this and why is this happening, right? Because there are so many of these factors as Siddharth was telling us, talking about the human factor, the environmental stuff, the classism, and so on and so forth. I think and just like do a little research, I guess, because the world is very accessible right now with the internet, etc. It's become very easy to find out these things. And as we always maintain with our podcast is that obviously it's a short podcast and these are just primers that we're trying to give you. Our hope is that you look at this information and then do your own research, go out there, look for more stuff, figure out stuff, and hopefully better inform yourself. Yes.
And on that note, I would also just like to say, if you like this podcast, don't forget to check out our other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcast.com. You can also follow us on our social media. We are IVM Podcast on Twitter and Instagram. If you would like to reach out to me, I am Tushar_Abhi on Twitter. And Yon OK, please on Instagram. Joel, you are?
I am Pereira Joel on Twitter and joelpereira.esq on Instagram.
Siddharth, you are?
And I'm Siddharth3. That's SIDDHARDH. 3 that's my Twitter. Yeah.
Okay, all right. So that's it from us, guys. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks so much, Tushar and Joel.
Namaskar, this is Ashish Vidyarthi. Yes, my friend, these are challenging times, but in these challenging times, we can create something extraordinary. Do take time to listen to my podcast, Begin the Journey, available on the IVM Podcast, website, app, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Remember, we have a great opportunity called life. Cheers.
Are you constantly seeking happiness? Wondering how to make the most of every day? How not to let your inhibitions stop you from achieving your goals? It's now time to get your A game on. It's time to unlock your true potential. Tune in to the Empowering series with me, Zarina Poonawalla, to feel empowered in all genres of life. From behavioral skills to management skills, from health to relationships, from mental well-being to emotional well-being, and of course your finances. I've got you covered. With these tips and tricks from me, Zarina, and true life stories from my amazing guests, you're bound to bring your purest to the table. Tune in to the Empowering series with Zarina Poonawalla every Thursday on the IVM Podcast app, website, or wherever you listen to podcasts.